about NIST post-quantum crypto standards process and lattices.
Thank you, Chris. I want to thank the organizers also for giving me the opportunity of giving this talk, which is totally new to me, so I had to build it from scratch. So we'll see how it goes. I've never given a talk even remotely related to this. So my first reaction was to go over the 76 submissions one by one, but I figured out that maybe that was inappropriate. Okay, so let's see how it goes. And please interrupt me with lots of questions and remarks. Feel free to interrupt. Okay, so a few words about the NIST post-quantum crypto standardization process. So if you are interested to know about it, here are the links. So that can be read within, I don't know, 1 hour, and this one much more hours. But it's sometimes entertaining. So in short, NIST wants to standardize digital signatures and KEMS that are secure even against quantum computing. There is a list of criteria, and I've selected a few which I find probably the most relevant. So the KEM, the key exchange mechanism, should be secure against CCA attacks, chosen ciphertext attacks. It should allow to encrypt or exchange keys that are at least 256 bits, because the typical use for this would be to combine it with a symmetric key encryption algorithm. Signatures should be secure against chosen message attacks. And for both of them, there is a bound on the number of queries that the attacker can make. So in a CCA model of attacks, the attacker can make decryption queries. For the signatures, it can make signature queries. So NIST bounds the number of queries to 2 to the 64. So that's a concrete bound on the number of queries that the attacker is allowed to make. And then it gives a certain number of levels of security, so from 1 to 5. So I'm just giving here an example. I have no preference between 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I have no opinion whatsoever into which one is the most relevant. But just to give you an idea of what a level of security means, so level 5 means it's at least as secure as key search for AES 256. So it's a moving target. So if you improve key search for AES 256, say quantum leads, and you are moving the target. But yeah.
All the queries are classical or from the requirement, or they just don't specify?
Which queries? Oh, signature queries and decryption queries, yes, they are classical. Some other queries are quantum. So we'll get into this later. But these ones are classical because, for example, if I sign and I receive, if I'm the signer and I receive a quantum query for signatures, I don't feel compelled to reply.
You're serious about the moving target?
Yeah. No, yeah. So it's not. It was half ironical, but not completely. So indeed, I mean, if you think of quantum computing to solve this, so okay, asymptotically use Grover. But in practice, what does that mean? What is the cost of running Grover for this type of key exhaustive search? I don't know. That's,
is the point that's going to be composed with this anyway, so why not? Like,
yes, that makes sense. Yeah.
So to make your level 5 scheme more efficient, just improve the attacks on AES.
That's one way.
if you break AES, then you can just use identity.
Yeah. So maybe something that it shows is that something that it hints at is that high performance computing based on quantum computing, it's totally unclear at this stage, or at least at the stage of writing this document. So what would you do in practice to build a massive computation based on quantum computation? So there are like recommendations on how to do this in the NIST document, but using something that they call max depth, but it's only like hints at what to do and what to look at.
So, because you're a computer or a chip, right? Is it clear that you can say no to a quantum? Is it clear that you have an option to say no to a quantum signing?
Just don't put it in the super fridge.
Super fridge?
If it's not in a super fridge, then you're probably not going to answer a quantum.
So you heat it up.
You don't necessarily you don't have to heat it up. You just have to not cool it down.
I mean, your own personal bit should not
If
be
you just
entangled.
temporarily store the query yourself, then like you copy it and like you can't copy a quantum state, so it kind of makes it classical. You can.
No, but you have bounded memory as well, right? So you cannot do it forever. Somehow you
No, but if you keep a copy of yourself and you discard it, then.
Wi-Fi doesn't transport qubits. You're fine.
So at least the normal use of it. Yeah. Okay, so some timeline. So the call proposals was like 3 years ago. 82 candidates were submitted. 69 had the minimal criteria check. So I don't know what the others missed. Out of the 69, more encryption schemes or more CAMs than signature schemes. Far more. Then a year ago, there was the end of the first round, and 26 candidates appeared at the second round. I don't say passed to the second round because some of the candidates are merges of round one candidates. Still more CAMs than signatures. So one question is what next? So if you read, so I have to thank Martin for the end of this slide. So if you read the NIST website, it's totally unclear. So the commitment was 2021, maybe there is a round 3, or we select algorithms. There was a message on the mailing list last September by Dustin Moody saying that maybe there will be a third round, and we expect it to be in June 2020, so in 6 months. It's a very interesting paragraph. Actually, I've cut it, but it's an example of how not to commit yourself in the most non-committing way. So especially the end of it is, I like it a lot. But that was confirmed in a more committing fashion at a quantum safe crypto workshop organized by ETSI, which is the European standardization body. So apparently there will be a third round a few months later. Okay, so let's move to Lattice submissions. So out of the 26 round 2 candidates, 12 are based on Lattices, so almost half. And 9 CAMs, 3 signatures. So I've given the list. The other schemes, they involved multi-quadratic equations, code-based crypto, Merkle trees, hash functions, zero-knowledge proofs. Lots of beautiful things that I will not cover during this talk. So if you are interested, go and read. Maybe something special about Lattices compared to the others is that Lattices are the only ones that have both CAMs and signatures. So if you want to rely on the minimal number of hardness assumptions, take Lattices.
There was post-quantum RSA, but it didn't make it to second round.
Yeah, I'm speaking only of round 2. There were also, what was there? There was no code-based signature at round 1? No, maybe not. No.
Well, there was, but it was only there for like a week.
Ah, okay. But still. It made it to the 69 and not to the 82. Okay, so 69 authors in total, including 3 quadruple authors. Congratulations, Leo. 2 others who are not in this room. So a few sociological conclusions out of this. Lattice-based crypto enjoys the most focus out of all of the others. And the size of maturity of the community are higher. So in particular, designing an encryption scheme is easier now maybe than it was 10 years ago. And another conclusion from this is that encryption schemes seem much easier to design than signature schemes, which from a theoretical viewpoint may be a bit odd, because you can get signatures from one-way functions. We don't know how to do that for encryption schemes, but actually building signatures, concrete ones, seems more difficult. Okay, so why do we care about all this? Okay.
Which one of these are non-lattice encryption signatures? Maybe you can.
So all these are just lattices.
Oh, this is the lattice.
Yeah, that's the 9 lattice schemes and the 3 signatures. Maybe more or less strict on what is a lattice. Or a lattice-based solution. The general understanding would be these 9 plus. Okay, so why should we care? So it's nice to see interesting theory turn into practice. It's always good. A comment that I have in my family very often is that I should make myself useful because I'm paid by the state, so maybe I should help the economy somehow. I guess I get bonus points if that public funding helps companies that avoid taxes. And maybe more seriously, this raises some interesting problems or puts more emphasis on existing open problems. And that's the purpose of my talk. So during the rest of this talk, I will overview the CHEM candidates, overview the signature candidates, and then I will comment about some problems that are somehow related to this standardization problem, problems that I like. I don't claim that these are the interesting problems in general. It's just my personal choice.
I mean, your list of reasons doesn't include that we should find secure post-quantum crypto.
Sure, for number 2. No?
Oh.
Okay, so maybe an observation on CHEMs is that all 9 of them have a general design which is extremely related. So they all somehow follow from the following general design slide. And you take this general framework and instantiate it in different ways. So we will see there are different options for different steps in the framework. And if you do the combinatorics, then you end up with more than 9 potential proposals. So you can come up with yours. Okay, so we have a ring which is isomorphic to a copy of Z, to copies of Z. An integer Q, which is typically much larger than 2, and RQ, which is R quotiented by QR. So what is keygen? The public key is a matrix over that ring RQ. The secret key is a vector S over R. And here this is not capturing, so Leo just pointed out to me that this is not capturing one schema. It's not capturing Frodo, because S would be a matrix over R. And this A and S, they're such that S is small compared to Q, and S times A is also small compared to Q. Okay, so we'll see in the next slide that there are several ways to achieve this. How do we encrypt? So the public key is A. So to encrypt a binary message M, which is potentially a vector, and we build T and E small compared to Q, and we return A times T plus E plus, say, Q over 2 times M. So also this choice is a bit arbitrary. There are other options. Okay, so now how do I decrypt? I just multiply by S and round. Okay, why is this? Because S transpose times C, that's SAT. So S times A is small by design of the public key. So I get small times small, it's still small, plus STE, small times small, it's still small, plus Q over 2 times STM. Okay, so if I somehow, all this is small compared to Q, so if I take the most significant bits, I end up with ST times M. Okay, so it's not telling you how to recover M. I only recover the inner product with the vector S, but we'll see that there are ways around this. Okay, so I give you two ways to instantiate this. So the oldest one is the untrue one. So we've mentioned several times this week that it doesn't have a proof, but it has actually worked for the last almost 25 years, and it's pretty efficient. So the ring would be a polynomial ring, Z of X mod P, for some large degree P, which preferably is irreducible. And we set H to be G over F, where both F and G are small polynomials. So small in the sense that they have small coefficients. Okay, so this H is the A here. Okay, so that would be a matrix with a single entry. Okay, and when I decrypt, so F would be the S. So F is small compared to Q, and F times A is equal to G. It's small compared to Q. Okay, so that's one way to build the general setting. Okay, so something interesting about it is that when we decrypt, so I said we recover the inner product between the secret vector S and the secret vector M, and the message vector M. Here there are no vectors, it's just scalars. So I recover F times M, scalars over the polynomial ring. So I recover F times M. If I divide by F, I recover M. There are other ways to do it, but that's a perfectly valid way to do it. Okay, and then there is another strategy that we often attribute to Lubashevsky, Peikert, and Regev. So it works in the LW, in the general LW setup. So we have a matrix A, which would be uniform. So here RQ could be a polynomial ring or ZQ, a large matrix over ZQ, or a polynomial ring, or matrices over polynomial rings. So this matrix is uniform, and then we sample S0 and E0 small, and we set A to be A0 concatenated with minus A0, S0 plus E0. Okay, and we observe that when we multiply by this vector S, which is S0 concatenated with 1, S transpose times A cancels out, and we essentially recover the noise. So we indeed have an A such that, and an S, which is small, such that SCA is also small compared to Q. Okay, so that's another way to do it. And now, okay, so now if I do this in the naive way, I recover S times the message vector. So I'm losing information, but one way to get around it is to impose that the last coefficient of S is 1, and to impose that the plaintext vector is 0 concatenated with M, which is the actual plaintext, so that when I do my inner product, S0 is multiplied by 0, and M is multiplied by 1, and I recover the message. So far, so good. I promise that's the only technical slide from the whole talk. Okay, so let's move on. So what about security? Okay, so we have, when we encrypt, we have A times T plus E plus Q over 2M. And we want A T plus E to look random. So that if we have this, the scheme has a chance to be CPA secure. That is secure against chosen plaintext attacks. Okay, so in particular, we would A to look random. So depending on the choice of general construction, this would be called the untrue hardness assumption. So it's an assumption on its own. A is random. Or an LW-like assumption, because A was built with LW samples. So depending on the general design, here for the security of the public key, we either rely on some kind of intro-like hardness assumption or on some LW-like hardness assumption. And for the ciphertext, we have AT plus E, which we would like to look pseudo-random, assuming the pseudo-randomness of A. And again, that's some kind of LW-like assumption. Okay, so how do we get CCA security from CPA security? So there are generic transformations for this. All transformations in the random oracle model. So these transforms, they make use of a hash function, which is modeled as a random oracle. So we can query the hash function and we get values. And in the quantum attacker setting, it makes sense to model these hash functions as quantumly accessible random functions. So we can make quantum queries to these random oracles, and that's called the quantum random oracle model. So maybe two cases, at least at the moment, as far as we know. If the scheme is deterministic and perfectly correct, then we can use the so-called SXY transform, which enjoys a tight proof in the QROM. And there are not many schemes out of the 9 encryption schemes that I gave that are perfectly correct. So as far as I know, there is one, Entro Prime, but I'm not sure there are others. I'm not betting any dollar on it. Otherwise, you can use a variant of the Fujisaki-Okamoto transform. And a good reference point for this is a paper by Hofheinz, Hovelmans, and Eicke-Kiltz. Okay, so, yeah.
Okamoto, it gives you a CCA scheme even if you start with a CPA scheme with errors?
Yeah, it handles, at least in this paper of the HHK paper, they handle decryption errors.
Okay.
Whether they handle it well, that's a bit subjective. We'll get back to this, but they handle it.
I think Dan was contesting the correctness of the paper at some point. Is that clarified?
There are several theorems in the paper. Most are uncontested. And
After what?
It's
and there's one which is maybe not true.
I don't know. It's a very beautiful paper which is written in a very modular way, and you can combine different parts of the paper into in different ways. So checking full correctness, it's probably doable, but I don't know. It's a very nice read. Okay, so then which algebraic setup? So we can take matrices over ZQ. That's one choice. We can take a polynomial ring, ZQ of x mod p for some polynomial p. We can take matrices over a polynomial ring. In the last two cases, you can take different polynomials p, and there have been several proposals and even controversies on how to choose p. And you can also choose different q's. So a common choice would be p equal x to the n plus 1 with n a power of 2 and q congruent to 1 mod 2n, because that gives efficient arithmetic in those rings. Another interesting choice of q would be a power of 2, because then you can do arithmetic mod q efficiently also. So there are plenty of choices here. Depending on the choice that you make, you end up with a different construction. What is at stake when you do this choice? So that impacts the underlying hardness assumption. So maybe you do LWE or PLWE / ring LWE or module LWE. As far as I know, that doesn't seem to impact actual security. So in terms of attacks, that doesn't do any difference. And it has a significant impact on efficiency. Now you can choose how you get the small vectors. So in the scheme, S, T, and E are small. And then you again have plenty of choices. You can use integer Gaussians, centered binomial distributions, ternary distributions, possibly sparse ternary distributions. You can even use a deterministic E obtained by rounding. So you compute A times T and you keep the most significant bits. Okay, so plenty of choices. You can probably think of more options. So what is at stake when you do this? So that impacts the underlying hardness assumption. If sparsity is pushed a lot, that actually impacts security. So you end up with other attacks like the hybrid attack of Hogarth-Graham presented on N-true, but it extends to the schemes. So for example, in the round 5 submission, Hogarth, the hybrid attack is something that matters. Small s, t, and e. So if you choose them very small, so why would you choose them very small? So it has two interesting potential applications. You can choose q smaller. So if you choose the small things smaller, then a smaller q is still large compared to the small things. So that allows you to decrease q. So an extreme case is a lac submission, where q is below 8 bits. Or you can get perfect correctness more easily, which is what was done in N-true prime. And then how to set parameters. So I go very briefly on this one because that was covered already. So the common strategy goes back to the ADPS Europe paper. So first, you forget about the CCA upgrade reduction loss. So okay, we have a transform in the QROM with a a loss in the security proof. No one takes that loss into account when setting parameters. You can,
Always true, I don't think.
someone takes this loss into account?
Tesla?
Not a chem.
I want to say
So that would be true for signatures. But,
Leo, am I crazy? Does photochem take into account?
no, I don't. It would result in horrendous parameters, especially at the time of writing a photochem. The bonds were so bad that that would be a disaster in terms of parameters.
all the other losses we can carry.
Maybe I can say that n-true prime could take the loss into account, but I think Dan would disagree with us in that type of statement. But, you could imagine that you could write that n-true prime can rely on the XXY transform, and the loss of SXY is quite limited. I'm doing a lot of advertisement for n-true prime so far. Okay, so express the selected harness assumption as a lattice problem. So you translate your LWE type of assumption or n-true type of assumption as a lattice problem. And then you try to assess how strong lattice reduction needs to be to break the scheme. So that translates via Yun-Miss Chen PhD thesis into a block size for BKZ. And then you use the cost of the best known SVP solvers in that dimension, which Martin discussed about. Okay, so that gives you how much it costs to solve for a specific instance, but it doesn't tell you how to set parameters. So when you set parameters, typically you would try many possible choices and keep the most efficient one according to your target function for efficiency. And most efficient one, which is at least below some security, above some security cost. Okay, so you try lots of different parameters, and among those that are above some cost to break the scheme, you keep those that give you the schemes that you prefer. So, you can try to minimize sizes, costs, or optimize simplicity, whatever that means. Questions on chems? Okay, so the situation is very different for signatures. There are much fewer of them, but the design is much more varied. So fewer, but more diversity somehow. So let me go into somewhat more into details for this signature algorithm. So first, let's start with Falcon. So the idea, the general idea, is to combine n-true sign with the GPV framework so that it doesn't leak information when you provide signatures. So maybe that's the general intuition. So the public key is a quotient of two polynomials with small coefficients, mod q. Then the secret key is a small basis of some lattice related to h. So you look at the lattice of pairs of polynomials such that a times h minus b is your mod q. So you already have one solution thanks to your public key generation, and you can build a second solution, and hopefully that gives you the full basis. And the signature would be a Gaussian sample over a lattice coset. Okay, so, and then on top of this, there are lots of optimizations to actually make it work efficiently in practice. So that results in very compact signatures. The downside is that the code or the algorithms even are somewhat complex. So it requires discrete Gaussian sampling for integer Gaussian distributions. You have floating point arithmetic on the way. You use towers of subfields to generate your key and also to generate the signatures. It's beautiful. I love it. It's really, you can spend time looking at Falcon, and there are plenty of good ideas in it. So it's really interesting to read. And the harness relies on solving an inhomogeneous version of this. So basically, given H, the public key, and some target Y, you want to find a small a such that A times H is almost Y.
You also have indistinguishability of
Indistinguishability of the...
and true from random.
Yeah, so that's, okay, so good question. Thank you for this question. It's much less worrying than for encryption schemes because F and G are much less small. So F and Gs are very close to square root Q, and if they were above square root Q, there would be actually a proof of statistical uniformity. So we are not in that regime, but we are not too far from it. So that's kind of the theoretical answer. The practical answer is that the key forgery attacks, when you look at figures, they are much less, they are much more costly than the signature forgery attacks. So for the parameters that they choose, it's much easier, but still a huge cost, to produce signatures forgeries and to produce a key forgery.
It is true that this is the only assumption needed in the proof, right? As long as you have use the proper distribution of H here.
So if they were using an H with F and G above the square root Q bounds, at some stage they would hit a regime where this would be the only assumption. But they are not there yet. They are not there.
But isn't it true that this is the only assumption, but it's for the specific distribution of H, which is not uniform, but is sort of not too far from uniform?
Yeah, but then you are making an assumption on H.
It's no assumption about H, it's just H has this distribution, that's it. That's the only.
Yeah, I guess you can say this, yeah. Yeah. So you could say it's an inhomogeneous version of this where H is from some distribution. It's the same for the encryption schemes. It's a special variant of ring LWE where the A's are chosen in some way. I suppose. Dilithium and Tesla. So they have a similar design based on works of Vadim Lubashevsky, including his Eurocrypt 2012 paper. So basically, it's translating Schnorr's discrete log type signatures into the lattice setting. So once you've said this, it requires quite a lot of work to make it go through. So the public key is a matrix over a polynomial ring. And T is A times S1 plus S2. The secret key is S1 and S2. And signing consists in proving knowledge of S1 and S2. Okay, so I'm not going to explain in more details how that works. Maybe just to comment on the result. It provides larger signatures, significantly larger. I don't know, maybe a factor 3, maybe more, I don't remember exactly. We'll see on the next slide. It's, on the good side, it's much easier to implement. So no Gaussians, no subfields, no floating point numbers, just rounding and arithmetic mod Q. And it also relies on the hardness of the same type of inhomogeneous version of this. So same type of assumption. Okay, so what type of efficiency do we get? So here I gave a table to compare. So hopefully I'm comparing comparable things. So I took a non-optimized C code because Tesla didn't provide optimized C code timings. It's for a single signature because in some cases if you produce many signatures there are tricks to decrease the cost. Sizes are in bytes, runtimes in cycles. So what you can see in particular is that the Falcon signature size is like 700 bytes. That's much less than the Dilithium or Tesla signature sizes. What you win by spending a lot of effort on implementation is a significant factor on signature sizes. On the downside, for example, they have a keygen which is horrendous. Okay, so this is any questions on some lectures? So I move on to a list of problems that I like. So it's partly based on a talk that was given by Jacob Alperin-Sherif via a video conference at a workshop in Italy a couple of years ago, and on the blog post that Leo and I wrote also some time ago. So it could be seen as some kind of updated version of this, or yet another version of this list of problems. Okay, so let me first go into the best known algorithms type of questions. So when we set parameters, we consider the best known practical algorithms. So it's important to know what they are and how their costs are extrapolating. So Martin discussed quite extensively on this. So let me insist a bit more. So for example, have sieving and enumeration be pushed as far as possible. These are the best known algorithms in practice. Can they be improved even more? So if they can be improved a lot, that would have impact on security estimates. Also, the best known algorithms are all heuristic. So one natural thing to do about them, to understand them and be able to reason about them, would be to prove these costs of these best known algorithms. Or there are other ways to understand algorithms. So proofs is one possible way. Experimentation is another way. So if you run lots of experiments on your algorithms, you somehow learn things about them, like concrete computations. And in particular, what can we do to support and dispute these heuristics? So how far can we go into testing them experimentally and checking them? So in particular, the fact that it's easy now to call this type of algorithms makes it easier to do experiments. And also, one possible avenue would be to improve cost lower bounds. So improve a lower bound, that means increase the lower bound rather than decrease it. It's somewhat easy to decrease the lower bound. So in particular, in many of these cost estimates, we lower bound the cost of running BKZ by the cost of running a single call to an SVP or an SVP enumeration or an SVP sieve. Okay, so, but something that we don't take into account is that we do more than one call when we do these BKZ runs. So can we have a good intuition on how many times we call these algorithms? Because that would be an open problem. So one more practical question even is whether sieving outperforms enumeration for very large dimensions, in particular considering its memory requirements. So it has a space cost which didn't kick in so far, but if we consider bigger computations, does it start to matter? And if it does, how do we measure the cost of that? And now, if we turn to quantum computations, how do we cost a massive quantum computation? So I think that's also a very interesting line of questioning. And as far as I know, the picture is not so clear. Okay, so another type of questions is the choice of the assumption that you make to support the security of the scheme. So somehow, when you have a scheme, you say, okay, so if this problem is secure, then the scheme is secure. So there are questions related to this type of to these assumptions. So if you live in an asymptotic world, many of these assumptions are polynomial time equivalents when you stretch the parameters sufficiently. But for concrete parameters, most of this vanishes. So I have a provocative first question. Is LWE as okay as an assumption as LWR? Because so far, all the proofs of LWE hardness based on the LWR assumption, they all degrade a lot.
The other way around, right?
No, I did it this way on purpose. That's also true. All the proofs of LW harness based on the LWR harness assumption, all these proofs are bad, or non-satisfactory.
What proofs are there?
I do some Renyi divergence thing to go back to LWS.
Add a bunch of noise.
Yeah.
Add Gaussian noise to the...
I think, yeah, that type of things.
Is there anything else?
Whether LWR is possibly stronger than LWE.
Yeah, why not?
Fair point.
Nothing points to the opposite so far. And it has been introduced much before LWE. So as Nadia recalled, that dates back to Bonnet and Venkatesan in the mid-90s.
Same problem.
Hidden number problem?
It's not the same as LWR.
Yes, it is. Let me recall it. You have AI, and there is a secret S.
No, I know what you're going to say, but it's not true.
You give out the most significant bits of AI times S.
AI these are integers.
Yeah.
But Q?
LWR is vectors, and you only give out the MSB of the inner product.
So it's one-dimensional LWR, if you want.
But these,
Which is as hard as LWR in n dimensions.
this matters a lot. Like if you look at the attacks that Nadia told us about, they're giving away a ton of bits.
Do you agree that one-dimensional LWE is equivalent to LWE?
Which?
One-dimensional LWE versus n-dimensional LWE. So we have a paper on this together. So I know what is going to be your answer.
No, I don't agree because a loss in the amount of noise.
Yeah, but I live in an asymptotic, so I pretend to live in an asymptotic world where
They're not
we lose a lot on the factors.
You lose like an exponential amount in how much relative noise there is, or how much absolute noise there is, rather. Like how many bits are hidden.
Yeah.
Exponential difference between the one.
So here you can set it to be 1 over poly compared to the. You can also set the noise to be 1 over poly.
I'm saying the n-dimensional version and the one-dimensional version, there's a qualitative or exponential difference. If you go through the reduction, there's an exponential difference in how big the noise is.
But the reduction goes both ways. Huh?
You lose an exponential amount if you go the other.
No, that's not true. On alpha? No.
Not
You lose a polynomial.
an absolute amount of noise. But like
But it doesn't quantify hardness. Huh? What quantifies hardness is a relative noise. Huh? So relative noise is almost preserved. Huh? So relative noise is almost preserved. Huh? But you only lose a polynomial factor.
in the rate of noise.
Yes.
I agree, but the rate of noise for like hidden number problem, they're giving away like a very tiny amount of the amount of rounding is a very tiny amount.
You give out very few bits.
You give out a lot of bits. You give
No, very few bits. Very few bits. Even less.
a hidden number problem.
Yeah.
The version that
it's defined in a general way. So you could give whichever fraction of the bits that you want. But the range of parameters which is of interest to them is to give out, say, 1 bit.
So this is the point. Giving out 1 bit is not consistent with your asymptotic thing because once you give out only 1 bit, that's noise of like 1. And then if
No, that means relative noise which is very small. Huh?
No, that's huge relative noise. If you only give out 1 bit.
Noise rate, say noise rate, which is relatively
That's
small.
huge. That's huge. If you only give away 1 bit of the product, that noise rate is enormous. It's like you're obliterating everything. It's 1 essentially.
So take Q equal to the n, and you give out the most significant bit.
1 bit. Yes.
Yeah. So the alpha.
It's like 1/2.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so if you pay a polynomial factor in the switching between these things.
Oh, yeah. So if you take just 1 bit, it will not go through.
Yeah. That's what
So you need to take a bit more than 1 bit. Log n.
Okay.
Log n bits. Log n out of n.
Okay.
It's very similar. And For this set of parameters, the best known attacks are actually the
I
same.
mean, the only difference I can see is n dimensions versus one dimension. Modulo this log n,
So, I think there's, okay, maybe we have to take it offline, but there's something about the inner product that I think matters, because the inner product compresses you down just to ZQ, even if your group size is Q to the n. So you're hiding, like, almost all the bits that way. I don't know.
Let's continue offline. But whatever works here for LWE also extends to LWR. Okay, so that was a very provocative first item. I'm sorry about this. What about MLWE versus PLWE? So asymptotically equivalent when you use matrices of small ranks with polynomial losses everywhere. In practice, again, so that's an interesting question. Another question is whether the n-true assumption is much more aggressive or not than the PLWE and module LWE assumptions. It's of another type. You can interpret n-true as a module problem where there are unique shortest solutions. There are extremely small solutions compared to what you expect in a random two-dimensional module. So it's some kind of USVP for rank 2 modules, which is a bit special. And another problem which is used, for example, in the 3-bear submission is the so-called integer MLWE problem, whose hardness still needs investigating.
Damien, I assume that you therefore understand this 3-bear submission?
Sorry?
I therefore assume that you actually understand this submission?
Oh, I'm not going to commit to this. Sorry? I'm not committing to understanding fully any of the submissions. But it's related to the Mersenne submission somehow, which didn't make it to round 2. Some similarities. Okay, so still related to assumptions. So some schemes make more or less standard assumptions. And even with standard assumptions, sometimes the parameters are stretched in a way which is quite audacious. So maybe that's the item that I prefer on this slide. And I think that's a very important one because I think it's going to be the standard, of course, because I'm one of the authors of Dilithium. Yeah, so I don't think it has received a lot of attention, this question related to Dilithium and how much it is known, this thing. So Dilithium relies on some kind of harness of cis harness assumption, but it relies on cis for the L infinity norm. Okay, why not? I mean, asymptotically, for some ranges of parameters, no difference. L infinity and L2 norms are equivalent up to square root n factors. But for these parameter settings, it does matter, because if you look at the norm of the solutions, the L infinity norm is much below Q, but the L2 norm is above Q. The L2 norm is usually bigger than the L infinity norm. And here, the L2 norm of the solutions is above Q. So if you analyze the scheme instead in terms of the L2 norms of the solutions, you have a difficulty because the trivial vectors Q0000 are shorter than the norm band, that the L2 norm band that you have, but they are still not useful. So we are in a range of parameters where Q is really small compared to the norms of the solutions. So one way to maybe go into this direction would be to see if the Mitchen-Schopikert paper that we discussed earlier this week extends to this range of parameters. So a very large L2 norm above Q, but still L infinity norm below Q. And whether algorithmically we can exploit it or not. And so when you do these slopes of GSAs and so on, it messes up things completely because these Q vectors are already below your L2 target norm that you want to reach. So So far, the thing that we propose in the Dilithium paper as an algorithm to solve this problem is to randomize the basis so that we forget about these useless Q vectors. And then we run lattice reduction. It's a very, I don't know, depressing algorithm. So you have very short vectors, but you randomize everything so that you hide them. And then you hope that when you run lattice reduction on it, then you don't find them again. You find actually useful vectors. So I think this question is interesting both from the harness perspective and from the algorithm perspective. Another way that parameters have been stretched quite a bit is the various shapes of noises. So can this be exploited into lattice algorithms? I think Chris asked the exact same question a bit earlier today or yesterday, I don't remember. The concrete harness of intro schemes against the Kirchhoff-Rook 2017 attack. So 2017 is the one that tries to find very short vectors in a lattice where you have lots of unexpectedly short vectors. So overstretch intro, I think that's what it is called. So some submissions say that it doesn't apply, but it has not been substantiated in details, as far as I know. And if you are done with the KF17 paper, you can go back earlier in time and move to the KF15 paper, which would also apply possibly to some schemes. So this KF15 looks at binary LWE. So when you look at LWE, where the secret is made of binary entries, then there are better algorithms that are known. In particular, this algorithm, so when S is uniform or S is sufficiently large, all algorithms are like 2 to the n in terms of complexity for standard parameters. For binary secrets, it's 2 to the n over log n. Okay. And that could possibly apply to some of the schemes where the noise has been chosen very, very small. Or the secrets sometimes have been chosen very, very small. Elena, you don't like my,
If you have enough
proposal.
You don't.
Aha, you didn't read the very end of the KF15 paper.
Yeah, but there is a bug at this very end. I don't think it's correct.
Okay, so what they suggest at the very end is that if you don't have enough samples, you just create them yourself by re-randomizing the samples that you already have. What don't you like about this?
But to do that, so this is Vadim's strike from back in the days, but I think you need to start with like n to the 1 plus epsilon samples, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
In theory, but in practice you can take 3 or 4 or 10.
Okay.
I think the paper would be heuristic in many ways. But still somewhat reasonable.
So do you believe in the heuristic?
Okay, so this one, yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think I do. But I'm happy to be disproved.
The relevant question is, do you disbelieve the heuristic so strongly that you're willing to bet a crypto scheme on it, right? So,
so maybe for actual concrete parameters, maybe this is too costly. That could totally be the case. But I think it should be tried. It should be actually computed. Okay. On the choice of the polynomial ring. So many polynomials are possible. Does this impact security? So for example, can cyclotomic polynomials be shown bad in any kind of way? Among the cyclotomics are some worse than others. Can the other polynomials selected by some of the NIST candidates be showed bad in some kind of way? I think all this is open. And in many cases, this translates in terms of ideal SVP attacks. But what do these attacks on ideal SVP actually say? Because none of these attacks is known to extend to PLWE or module LWE. It's attacking a problem which has been shown no easier than PLWE and MLWE, but maybe these attacks are only showing that ideal SVP is not the right assumption to start with. and why, and how do they help choosing the polynomial. So I think it's an interesting area. Okay, so what is the impact of decryption errors? So most of the candidates have decryption, have imperfect correctness. So what is the impact of this? So in particular, one possible question is to determine the precise interplay between the polynomial ring structure and the probability of incorrect decryption. So as far as I know, it's still not fully understood. And assess the probability of having weaker secret keys. And if we want to avoid this type of attacks via security proofs, what does it impact? What is the impact on actual parameters? So these are like very concrete questions on very concrete schemes. So papers that I really enjoyed, recent papers that I really enjoyed is the one by Guo, Johansson, and Yang from algebraic a few months ago, which is an interesting start to start thinking about this type of questions, I find. So another set of open problems is related to the QROM proofs. So the Fujisaki-Okamoto upgrade to CCA security incurs a large loss in terms of advantage to distinguish between different ciphertexts. And so we could ask to decrease the dependency of the CPA distinguishing advantage as a function of the decryption error probability. So if you look at the HHK paper, there is a dependency in the security loss which depends on the decryption error probability, which is actually not small at all for parameters that have been chosen in practice. So the dependency is also in terms of the number of decryption queries and in terms of the distinguishing advantage of the CCA upgrade. Another possibility which would be to show that some of these dependencies are actually intrinsic. We have to pay for them. Okay, so there is a work at TCC also a couple of months ago that decreased a lot the dependency on the number of decryption queries. And I have a recent work with colleagues from the University of Monash that decreases the dependency in terms of the distinguishing advantage of the CC upgrade, which we'll put online somewhat soon if we can. So this is for encryption schemes, and there is a similar questions for signature schemes. So for Falcon, the question doesn't really apply because there is already a tight QROM proof. For Tesla, they set parameters so that they actually take the security loss into account. But for Dilithium, it remains somewhat open. And let me mention 3 recent works on this. So in one work by Kiel, Subashevsky, and Schaffner, they introduced a new assumption so that they have a nice QROM proof under this new assumption, but it's somewhat artificial. Then there is a paper from Crypto last year that has a somewhat good proof, but under an assumption which is not fully proven. And there is a paper by Liu and Zhendri which has a QROM proof, but a degradation in terms of the number of signature queries, which is very bad. So there is room for improvement in this type of in this line of questions. Okay, so this is it for the core of the talk, and so I'll try to conclude. There are other aspects, there are many other aspects related to this NIST standardization process that I didn't cover, so including non-lattice candidates, efficient implementations, proved implementations, how do you make sure that the implementation that you have is actually doing what you want, resistance to side channel attacks, and how to measure, and cost simplicity, and this is just among many others. And if you are interested in this type of questions and others, register to the mailing list. And maybe I'll finish with the post-NIST, post-quantum crypto slide. So let's first comment on the basic asymmetric primitive, like encryption and signatures. So have you reached a ceiling for basic primitives, so in terms of efficiency. Can we push encryption even more in terms of practical performance? And can we push signatures even more? So by hand waving, I would say there are fewer signature schemes with much more varied type of design. So there should be more room for improvement for signatures. But I don't know, prove me wrong. So we have a mild improvement for Falcon in this draft, which is available on the print. But it's probable that there are others. So that's one type of questions. Another type of questions would be whether, so all these schemes, they rely on the random oracle model. So one way to just forget about QROM, non-tightness, and so on is to use standard model proofs without a random oracle. So it seems to give less efficient schemes, but how less efficient? And how much are we going to pay to get standard model schemes if we want to? And once we are done with encryption and signatures, what next do we want to implement in a very efficient way? Is ID-based encryption of sufficient deployment interest so that we put a lot of energy on it? Zero knowledge proofs, which would have applications to voting and anonymous credentials, or computing on personal data and so on. So I think finding good practical applications is also very interesting too. So thanks for your attention.
Time for more